Welcome to another episode of Saastrana podcast. Today we have with us Scott, Senior Director of Product Development at Ping Identity. Ping is in the business of identity security, taking care of authentication, authorization, and single sign-on. Scott in this podcast shares with us some of the best practices for incorporating security in the software development lifecycle. He also shares with us some of the primers of identity and access management systems, some of the trends and his views on zero trust framework, and also his views on CARTA, continuous adaptive risk threat assessment. Welcome to the show, Scott. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Venky. Nice to see you.
For the benefit of the audience, I know you, Scott, but for the benefit of the millions and millions of viewers who are going to see this very popular show, can you introduce yourself?
I work at Ping Identity, and I'm a director of our product engineering team here. So I'm responsible for several teams that build out our federated SSO and access management solutions here. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. Pretty much my whole career at this point has been in identity security. So prior to Ping, I was at Entrust for about 11 years, and I've been at Ping now for this is my 12th year. So yeah, a long time in the space. I feel like at this point in my career, it's hard to do anything else. So it's this is what I'm doing when I grow up.
You're a senior director, right? You're promoted.
Senior director. I'm also the site manager here for Vancouver. So I have a lot of different hats I wear.
So what does Ping Identity do?
Yeah, so Ping Identity, it's been around for about 20 years. Our CEO, Andre Durand, he founded the company, and what his vision was for the company was that he said that he wanted to create a visa for identity. He didn't really know what that was, but he knew that he wanted identity to be portable, so a user could securely log in over the internet and prove themselves to many different applications and domains, and that identity would just traverse through untrusted networks in a secure way somehow. He didn't really know what technology would enable that. So he didn't even know, would it be a product company or whatnot. Ping actually started more as a consulting company. But, we're really a niche player for around federated SSO for a long time thing. And his first product was Ping Federate, which was really a federation server, one of the first federated SSO products that was in the market. So I'm responsible for that. That was our flagship product for a long time. We have many customers, massive deployments that use that product. It's had a lot of success with that. So Ping was kind of a small company for a long time around the federated SSO space. But yeah, a good 10 to 15 years ago, the whole world needed single sign-on. Applications were moving to the cloud. People were using SaaS apps. They didn't want new accounts, new passwords. They wanted to just log in securely into their existing directory server in their enterprise and then get single sign-on access to these applications. And SAML was the technology that enabled that. There are also a lot of partner use cases and customer use cases where SSO was critical. And so Ping had a lot of success with that. It was really just a nice, lightweight service you could deploy and enable that use case in a customer environment. But since that time, we've branched out into many different areas. We've gotten bigger, a lot of success invested in many different other products. So we do access control, identity storage, like with the directory server. We have authentication solutions, risk management. We're branching out into ID verification and in personal identity solutions as well.
And I'm seeing this focus on identity a lot, even in everybody is selling a SaaS service, and we are no different. We are selling web applications, firewall, and a central dashboard SaaS service. And when I talk to enterprises, the more and more I talk to them, they realize I don't want yet another portal with yet another user ID and login.
Yep.
So you have to integrate with my corporate login systems, either Active Directory or SSO. And so SSO integration for identity becomes an integral part of the procurementation that they make for any SaaS application. Not just us, but it can be a CR, right? So, and obviously there was a tailwind brewing up for this to happen, and Ping had an early start, and the fact that you were a small company for a long time enabled you to become a big company quickly.
That's right. It was just technology that Ping had invested a lot in early on, and the whole world needed it, and that was very fortunate.
Identity is the heartbeat of anything that we do in the internet, but just identity and identification is not enough, right? Because after identification, what do you do? So can you explain IAM in a nutshell?
Yeah, identity and access management, it's really like a framework and practice describes how users are going to securely access resources, like the applications or APIs. So that encompasses a lot of different things. You first need to identify your users. If you are, say, a website, you need to offer a registration process to those users. If you are an employer and you're bringing in a new employee, HR or IT is onboarding them somehow. At that point, they're going to be issued credentials. So simple case, it's a username and password that the user can then come back later on and then prove who they are. And we have a high degree of confidence in that it's the same person you identified initially. And then you have authorization controls. So once they're authenticated, how do they access these applications? What are they allowed to do at that point? And IAM also defines really a whole life cycle around these things. So you're going to have users that register, they want to leave, you'll revoke them at certain points. There's a whole governance process that's required around identities as well. So identities might not always be users. You might also have devices or services, applications that are representing sort of the client aspect and accessing other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Identities is not restricted only to people, right? I mean, over the internet, in fact, app-to-app communication, device-to-app communication is going to be it already is a bigger part of the internet traffic than human-to-app communication. So, and identifying them is going to be, and everything needs identity. I recollect you and me going back a long time back, we had something called risk-based authentication that we both worked on, right? Where authentication and identity itself is not just user ID password. There can be a second two-factor authentication, three-factor authentication. And then instead of forcing the user to always do 2FA, there was this concept called risk-based authentication. Do you guys do something on that space as part of identity and management?
We do have, at Ping, we do have a risk service as well. It's machine learning based. We're looking at large volumes of data. What is the user typically doing? Where are they usually coming from? What applications do they typically access? And that will drive policy decisions. So in the perfect case, 9 o'clock in the morning, you're accessing your apps as an employee, first time of the day, nothing unusual. You're just logged in. You don't even have to enter your password. But if you're at a coffee shop, it's in the evening, something unusual, the risk policy would detect that, and then it would force you to do a stronger form of authentication. Nowadays, people are very fatigued with entering passwords too many times and entering OTPs from text messages and stuff, and it's just a mess. And so ideally, you offer a passwordless experience up until the point where you see that there's any of this involved.
But it also has a distinction between, is this transaction with a human or is it transaction with another app? The risk-based authentication and prompting for additional challenges doesn't work if it is an app or a device, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Policy also has to be aware of not just asking for authentication, but who is on the other side. Is it an app or a device or possibly a human?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Something that we did not have to worry about 10, 15 years back because we assume most of the cases is going to be human, but certain devices, the API economy is just exploded now.
Absolutely.
So, have you heard of ZTNA?
ZTNA, educate me. No.
Zero Trust.
Zero Trust framework?
Network access. Zero Trust network access. Zero Trust framework.
Yes.
I mean, I was just reading through it as part of preparing for this call. What is it saying other than identifying the user to establish trust? Is it something new that you have a view on that? Or
Zero Trust network, like a Zero Trust network approach, the term has been around for several years. It's not that new. I believe there's a Forrester analyst that coined the term initially. And it's really kind of an evolution of our industry. You think back to when we first started working on security solutions 20 years ago. It was a much simpler time where we were picturing, you have a nice DMZ, you have a security layer there, and the apps are behind that. You probably remember the first product we worked on was a proxy-based solution. Right? It was an encrypted tunnel, and the users going through the browsers connecting through that tunnel, and then on the other side, there's another a proxy that then decrypts it and then goes to the application, and all that traffic would be unencrypted at that point, just going right to that backend network. But that we work in the Zero Trust framework, you should assume that compromises could be anywhere in your network, and the applications can be anywhere. You don't have this nice sort of layer of protection where everything's in the data center and everything is securely under your control. Pretty much every enterprise is using SaaS apps. They have a mix of their own internal apps that might be deployed in private cloud or in public cloud, AWS and Google. And so you don't really have this nice perimeter anymore. So you have to really change your mindset and think about what are the security parameters, and what should you really be monitoring around these things? It's really changed. It's more of a distributed architecture at this point where it's just the user going to these apps and what do you really need to consider around what is normal behavior and how do you need to securely authenticate these sessions.
But central to it is again is authentication, right? Instead of just because it's an internal network, don't assume it's secure.
Right.
Any two endpoints make authentication an integral part of enabling the transaction, and without that, it's zero trust. Is that a fair summary?
That sounds accurate to me. Yeah.
Anyway, I still feel it's basically a new label to an old model.
Where everything is now is more complex. Where users are coming from now, it's not just they're not just at their desk in the office now. They're at home. They're at coffee shops. It's just an evolution of thinking about where are the threats located now.
The other tech mumbo jumbo buzzword that I keep hearing when I'm talking with my customers is CARTA, continuous adaptive risk trust assessment. Which also has identity at the center of it, but also behavior, risk assessment, trust controls in place. Any views on that with respect to your own views and what does Ping do in that area?
So it's not something I dig into that much, to be honest. I'm more on the engineering side at Ping here, but my understanding of CARTA is it's more built around zero trust framework, but it is what it layers on top is really, or it emphasizes more the continuous monitoring and adapting to the different risks that you have. So focus on, again, what is normal behavior for these users, for these identities, constantly monitor that. You can't just have a strict policy that's going to be successful for you forever. So you think back to when we worked 20 years ago, we worked on a web access management product, and it was using RBAC based control, so role-based access control. And you would go and you would configure those roles, say these applications require these roles, these users are getting these roles, and you think, all right, this is kind of satisfying. I've got this all defined and now I'm good, now I'm secure. But that's really just the first step, and you've just enabled the access to the applications, but that's not really secure. That's you just giving people, the tools they need to do their job. But with CARTA and like the continuous adaptive risk model, you're more monitoring constantly for new threats, new attacks, things that look ordinary, using ideally machine learning, artificial intelligence. So you're constantly evolving your policies, your practices around keeping your applications secure and making sure that they're accessible to the right users.
The cynical part of me is saying that it's just a new label. The fundamentals are the same. The identities, the personas of the identities is probably more machines and devices, but the fundamentals of securing the transactions, access control, trust, technology part of it, doesn't change. The foundation has not changed that much, in my view.
Yep, I agree.
All right, now let me get into the segue to the next part, which is something close to what I do. And I have been thinking about it and contemplating about it because you have identity and access management as one vertical. And then you have firewalls and transactional. Once you have, we have a web application firewall, a SaaS product, right? And we do transactional security where at the point of the transaction and the traffic, in real time, we try to identify the intent. Is it good traffic or bad traffic? Is there an anomaly or deviation in this traffic? Is there an injection that is happening? And guess what? It's like the identity awareness is a little bit less. I want to ask you this question because a lot of people I talk with, when I ask them what do you do about security, the first thing they say is, yeah, we have authentication in place. We have two-factor authentication in place. We have privileged access control. Our API keys are secured. And yet, when they do the pen testing, if identity access control by itself was secure enough, why is it when you do a pen testing, the best practice is to do a gray box pen testing where you give credentials? So obviously you want to build defense in depth and you want the pen tester to break other things after authenticating, right? So I just want your views on this. If identity and access control is enough, why is black box pen testing not enough? Why do people do gray box pen testing?
Yeah. I think the unfortunate part is that humans are frequently the weakest link in an organization. And you could have all the best security around there, but a phishing attack, clicking on the wrong thing on a site can quickly compromise somebody's machine. And then an attacker is in the network and they have access and they can impersonate that user. So I think that's probably why they lead with that, to see like what would be the risk of this particular set of credentials was compromised, what can be done at that point. So we do, at Ping, and I'm sure many of our customers, we do a lot of education to our own employees to make sure that they understand, how to identify phishing attacks and to avoid that. But it just takes one person to let somebody in, and then you're in trouble. So yeah, you have to assume that the threat is already inside your environment and make sure it's secure.
Yeah. And I think this is also where I would tie it into zero trust. Even if you have authenticated, you still cannot trust the fact the authenticated user is not going to do bad things.
Yeah.
The intent can be bad. So Venky and Scott have authenticated themselves as Venky and Scott into the system. But what if Venky is trying to do a privilege escalation to be a Scott through parameter manipulation? And in fact, if you look at all the cloud-based applications, they are public-facing. And it's not just internal applications, right? Like a banking application also has authentication. So a legitimate banking user can still have a bad intent to do fraud, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it tries to find out after authentication. In fact, most of the critical transactions happen only after authentication and authorizations, right?
I believe it.
And that's where you want to also make sure that your data validation is proper, your parameter manipulation attacks are, you have defenses in place. The challenge that I see, which gets me to the next part of the question, is you have this security assessment which are done by gray box testing, and you have policies to protect against those attack vectors through firewall policies. But the firewalls are not identity aware. The firewalls provide intent-based tracking of the threat and have either a allow or not allow rule. Do you think that firewalls, especially application firewall, which is where identity is central to authentication, and application firewalls, do you think they should integrate and talk better? Have you used any views on that?
Yeah, knowing where the attack is coming from. If you know that there's an authenticated session from Venky and there's an attack that's coming alongside of that, at least you can quickly narrow down, all right, what happened here? How did these credentials get compromised? How did this session get taken over? And that allows you to backtrack pretty quickly. Maybe it doesn't let you identify, well, this is actually, in this case, this is an advanced user that is doing a test or something. This is expected. Or so I think there could be strong reasons why you want to tie the two together and be able to tune the knobs around what's allowed based off of the type of user that this traffic pattern is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, because most of the firewalls, their concept of identity is restricted to IPs and maybe sessions.
Yeah,
not to
not
the
just
actual,
not the user. You don't know the claims about him and everything.
There is an opportunity which I have been thinking about for a long time, but certainly there are challenges. In fact, Gartner came up with another buzzword called RASP, Runtime Application Security Protection, which actually sits in the context and application framework. But then it did not take off, not because of technology issues, but because of deployment issues, auto scaling and all those things, right? So anyway, now let me ask, do you guys do anything now that you agree that it's an important thing? Is Ping doing something to integrate with firewalls and making it more identity aware?
I'm not aware of anything specific that we're doing, but we have a lot of moving parts here at Ping. It could be that we have something going on with our technology partners team, but I'm not aware at this time.
But I do see a lot of white papers or knowledge base in Ping's website of integration with other firewalls.
So we do integrate with gateways and proxies in certain contexts. Yes. So there are, we do combine our access control and authentication solutions there. We do single sign-on into, like, if you protect a bunch of, like a realm or something with a proxy, we can integrate with that and provide access for the users in there. But specifically with a WAF or I thought that was the nature of your question with a WAF. I'm not aware of anything specific there. So.
Or specifically making WAF more identity aware, because most of the integration is probably from making it SSO enabled, or probably you getting some insights on IP reputation for you to do the risk-based authentication. But enabling the firewall itself to be more identity aware is still a gaping technology gap that I see in the industry. So as an engineering leader, I mean, of course, you live and breathe identity security, and you are going to make sure that your own products are going to be used for your own user and device authentication. But outside of identity security, what are some of the security initiatives as part of your CI/CD pipeline, go, no-go issues that you guys do? Can you throw some light on your security hygiene initiatives that you guys do?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated team, security engineering team here at Ping. So they sit alongside of our teams. They're like another QA testing team that does a very deep review of any new features, functionality, around our products to make sure they identify the risk associated with that and do very detailed testing to make sure that it's as hardened as possible. Also, we get external penetration testers quite regularly to come in and look at our products and make sure that an outsider can't find new vulnerabilities as part of that. And we'll get to reports around that. We also participate in bug bounty programs. So we do get external submissions from bug bounties and review those very closely. And if it's a legitimate issue, we do pay money for those. Of course, like any security vendor, we're constantly getting requests from our customers about, asking, okay, we see you're using maybe this third-party technology in your product. There's been a vulnerability that's been announced about that, and we have to review that and see what if we're impacted at all by that. So we're constantly reviewing those and keeping up to date with these and making sure that we're keeping our products as secure as possible.
So we have an in-house team. That is, I recollect 20 years back, in a way, Entrust was also a little bit way ahead. You know, Serge Meister?
Yes, yeah.
Super genius guy who is to be the roadblock for our release cycle.
And they would review our stuff. I feel it was a much smaller team that we had at Entrust compared to what we have here at Ping. Like, we have a lot of engineers. Like, every engineering team has got dedicated bandwidth towards it. So, but it's critical for us. So, like, security is our business. If our security products have a security vulnerability, that's a major impact to our business. So we've had some of our competitors have issues there. And I'm sure that has caused some customers to look elsewhere.
I'm going to put you on a spot, and if you don't have to answer that, but I think what you're doing is, I would call it shift left. You're looking at in-house security team as an extension of your QA team and making sure that security is an integral part of your development cycle. Mm-hmm. But my favorite line is, everybody's talking about shift left, but they ignore what's right. So what do you do on production? Once it is in production, you still have to continue the testing. You still have to make sure that your production stack, which is an aggregation of many different components, any one of them has got vulnerable, is impacting your production system. So you have to continue the security assessment, not just before the release cycle.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you guys do anything there?
Well, we have a lot of our business is through SaaS. And so absolutely, you have to keep testing things. You have to make sure that, it's not just the new stuff, but even the new stuff can introduce vulnerabilities you weren't aware of. And so we have to do regular testing of everything that's out there. We have a lot of automation around our products to ensure that we're avoiding regression. We're getting ahead of issues there before our customers notice anything. So, it's like I said, it's our business. We need to be on top of that. So we do our best to.
It's never ending. It's like being in a treadmill. The entire security and operations. All right. Final question to put you on a spot.
Okay.
You're a senior director of engineering in a large company, which became large very fast by being a small company for a long period of time. Now, if you want to give your advice to a new CTO of an IAM startup or a SaaS startup, and make sure that they become bigger faster, as opposed to being a small company for a big period of time, what would be your advice? What are the pitfalls you want them to avoid?
I'd say, so identity needs to be a huge investment. I don't think we thought that way 20 years ago. I think front and center now, because they realize that the risks associated with it. And so it needs to be a large part of security spending. It needs to be a core part of the business. There's two major areas of identity. So there's the workforce identity and access management, and then there's CIAMs, customer identity and access management. There's some overlap with them, but there's some very different things that need to be considered. So for workforce, you want to make sure that we talked about, you want to be giving users the best tools where they can securely authenticate, give them strong multi-factor authentication solutions, they get them into the applications, and you need to monitor the access to the applications and make sure that you're checking for any anomalies and whatnot. The user experience is not that critical for workforce. Like, nobody's going to quit over a bad login experience at their employer. Maybe it's a frustration with their job or something, but they're not going to quit. You're absolutely going to lose business if you're making your customers create a new account, a password with X number of special characters in it and stuff, just to register for buying some product off your new website, right? That needs to be really smooth, really easy to do, but it has to be very secure. So we have a very different approach. And these things are always changing. You can't you really can't think like, oh, I'm going to just carve it out and then I'm going to code this and then I'm done. It evolves. There's new forms of authentication. There's new attacks. You really should be using best practice tools for this stuff and solutions that enable you to change how you're configuring, how you're providing the user experience to the user. So it's not all cemented in code. But once that code is all written, what happens when those developers leave your organization and you need to bring new people in? They don't know the code base. There's maybe bugs you're unaware of and everything. You really should be using hardened tools for these things that will give your business a lot more agility at that point.
Fantastic, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Scott Tomilson. Pleasure to have you on the call, Scott, and thanks a lot for your time.
You're welcome.